Over here in the hemisphere that I call home, it's winter time and the snow is piling up outside, so I figure that for the Datasheet Deep Dive series, it would be a good time to visit the snowy homeworld of the Space Wolves and talk about the goodest boys in the 41st millennium. A bunch of Space Wolf-themed units, the Wulfen and Thunderwolf Cavalry. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be doing another Datasheet Deep Dive. This time, a little bit of an interesting topic, comparing two units that are not found in the same kit, Wulfen and Thunderwolf Cavalry. I mean, I guess they do have some similarities in that they're both, you know, kind of wolfy. They both got a fur on them, so that basically makes them the same. But this topic was requested by the patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. So if you want to join them and shape the future of the Datasheet Deep Dive series by helping me pick new topics and casting your vote on what we should talk about next, you can visit patreon.com/tacticaltortoise and join them there. Also, a quick note that I've been doing a lot of streaming over at twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. So it would be sick if you could head on over there, drop me a follow, and join us for streams. I stream like a bunch of days a week, usually TTS 40K, either commentated games from the T5S2 series or live gameplay, both of which I do very often. So, yeah, it's a good old fun time. Come hang out with me. But anyway, as always for the Datasheet Deep Dive series, we're going to be starting off this video with a discussion of the various attributes of these two datasheets. We're going to be reviewing the datasheets for Wulfen and Thunderwolf Cavalry, talking about how they work on the table, the best ways to use them, as well as covering some synergies for both these units, both from the Space Marine Codex and, more importantly, from the Space Wolf supplement, before moving on to a comparison between the two using my very favorite friend, math, comparing a couple different weapon loadouts between the two units and rendering a final verdict. Which one should you put into your Space Wolves army, and or should you do that at all? Should you even bring these guys? It's gonna be a great video. I'm hyped. I hope you're hyped. Let's get to it. So starting off here, we'll start with the little brother of the two units, the Wulfen. These have been a fan favorite for a long time of Space Wolf players and were an absolute terror in 8th edition 40k, where right at the end of the edition, they got a huge bump in power from Saga of the Beast and started taking tables by storm. Lists with 20 or 25 Wulfen were seen all over the place, where they'd run at you, and if you couldn't deal with 3+ invulnerable saves and damage ignores and getting hit by Thunderhammers, you would just die. You would just be dead. Unfortunately, the Wulfen moon is setting now in 9th edition, and they're not doing quite so well, but maybe that's not entirely earned. So what does this unit do on paper? First off, it has a pretty beefy stat line. We're coming in at an 8-inch movement, which is pretty impressive for what is ostensibly just a regular infantry unit. We also have a big strength and toughness value of 5. That's pretty impressive, as well as 2 wounds, although that is to be expected from most Space Marine models. Now, interestingly, these guys were not affected by the bump up in Space Marine wounds count. I think a lot of people expected them to go to 3 wounds. They didn't. They're stuck at 2, so they're just basically a kind of difficult to kill intercessor. Now, some things that start going south. Obviously, we have 3 or 4 attacks, which is pretty solid. However, we have an abysmal leadership of 7. That is the standard leadership for a Space Marine model, but they don't have any buff to their unit champion, so they're stuck at leadership 7. And on top of that, they have a terrible save, at least by Space Marine standards, of only 4+, which will suck. Now, you can take them up to units of 10. They start at a unit of 5. Already, that's pretty expensive, given that they start at 25 points a model, which is kind of a lot. However, they do have some weapon options here to make that even more expensive if you really want to spend more points on these guys. First off, they have this terrible gun. It's just really bad. It's awful. Shoots D3 times blast for strength 4, AP 0, 1 damage. It's like a bolt pistol with extra steps. You can advance and shoot it, which is kind of okay, but their ballistic skill is 5. Like, it sucks. I feel like this gun should be free. It's so bad. Also, it's called an auto launcher. I kind of also feel like it should give them the assault launcher keyword so they can at least use that terrible assault launcher strat. I think that would be cool, but you can't. So anyway, don't bring that unless you have extra points. They start with Wulfen Claws as their initial war gear, which are just an abysmal melee option, and you will be replacing them. They're just strength 5, neg 1 AP for 1 flat damage. Now, but one thing to keep in mind is that the AP values on other weapons are a little bit deceiving, since they do have this Savage Killers rule, which means that Assault Doctrine is always considered to be active while they're making attacks. So all of their melee attacks are always going to be +1 AP forever and ever. Amen. They will also get the bonus of exploding 6s from the Super Doctrine as well. Now, Wulfen have a couple interesting options for their weapon upgrade. First up is the Frost Claws, which are kind of like lightning claws with extra steps. For just 5 points, you get +1 attack at strength 6, AP 2, 1 damage. However, you reroll your wound rolls a la Lightning Claws. What you have to remember, though, is that these are not, in fact, Lightning Claws. So instead of getting +1 attack for each of them that you bring, so a normal Space Marine with 2 sets of Lightning Claws, 1 in each fist would get +2 attacks. These guys have 1 set that gives them +1 attack, so they're going to be coming in at a base 4 attacks, 5, because they always count as charging, essentially. They also have the Great Frost Axe. Comes in at strength 8 for -3 AP, 2 flat damage, just a power fist profile, but without that annoying -1 to hit attached to it. However, I think the big headliner, usually for Wulfen, tends to be their Thunderhammer, because it comes with a free Storm Shield that is at the pretty hefty cost of 16 extra points, with obviously the normal Thunderhammer stat line, strength 10 in this case because they're base strength 5, -2 AP, which is going to be -3 with Savage Killers, and 3 flat damage, but for the trade-off of -1 to hit. Now, unfortunately for the Wulfen, the Storm Shield is actually not great for them because they come in at a base 4+ save, which means that the new Storm Shield rules giving them +1 to their armor save and a 4+ invulnerable save don't really work too well. They get to a 3+ armor save against AP 0 stuff, which is fine, but not great, and also against any AP whatsoever, they're just going to be falling back on their 4+ invulnerable save, which means that they're pretty easy to kill. To be honest, they're going to be kind of a glass hammer. With that in mind, the Frost Axe might be an interesting pick just to keep the cost of the unit down. The Frost Claws are also good, especially if you want to put out a boatload of attacks, all at pretty reasonable strength. However, the 1 damage sort of hampers it a little bit. So with all that in mind, we get the picture of a pretty lethal melee unit that unfortunately has a couple threat range issues. An 8-inch move with no additional buffs on top of that is not great and is going to be relatively easy to take out. That is contrasted with their big brothers, the Thunderwolf Cavalry. In stark contrast to the Wulfen squads, these guys are pretty fast. They come right out of the gate at a blazing movement of 10 inches, which is pretty impressive, as well as a 3+ weapon skill, ballistic skill, as becoming of a Space Marine. Strength 4, which is a little disappointing, but that's okay. Toughness 5, just like their Wulfen, however, 4 wounds, so they're basically going to be a little bit more than twice as difficult to kill, because they have twice the number of wounds. However, they also have a 3+ armor save, as we are expected of a Space Marine unit, but the downside is only 2 attacks for these guys. Now, obviously, Shock Assault is not included in there, so they're probably going to be swinging 3 times a piece, and they have a couple other ways to get additional attacks, but that's not very exciting, just those 2 attacks. This whole package comes at a very hefty cost of 45 points before any upgrades, so we can sort of see that while they are just about twice as hard to kill as a Wulfen, they are also basically twice as expensive and, unfortunately, don't hit twice as hard. So the Wulfen are probably going to be more efficient attacking. However, the Thunderwolf Cavalry have a better chance to actually get to melee, being more difficult to kill and faster. Buffing their speed even more is the Swift Hunter's ability, which gives them an additional inch when they pile in or consolidate, and they can advance and charge. So we're just light years faster than a Wulfen unit here. They're going to be going an additional 2 inches base plus D6 for that, and on top of that, even more, they have the core keyword, which means that they also benefit from all sorts of other threat range increasing effects that Space Marines and Space Wolves have access to, including all of the litanies that you can get from your Wolf Priests, like Canticle of Hate for +2 to charge, for example. So they're just going to be going way fast. Now, what they're delivering with that speed is a whole smorgasbord of different weapon options. They can take from any of the standard melee weapons list, including Lightning Claws or Thunder Hammers. They can also take Storm Shields as well. In addition to bolt guns, they can just take bolt guns, which is, I think, kind of funny. Get a little Wild West action there, them shooting their cavalry rifles. However, that's capped off by this also very impressive Crushing Teeth and Claws attack. which they make in addition to their normal weapons. Sort of like a chainsword, this weapon gives them 3 additional attacks every time they fight. However, with the caveat that they cannot make more than 3 attacks with it. So you can't dump your base attack profile into it. This is just representing the mount biting you 3 times, and that can't be modified in any way. The profile of the Teeth and Claws is okay. It comes in a Strength 5, -2 AP for 1 damage. Not super impressive, especially since they don't have any way to buff the damage of it. It's just going to be 1 damage forever, but it is nice to have, especially when you're attacking other infantry. You can kind of get a high volume of attacks out of these guys. It doesn't really make up for having such a significantly smaller attack pool than the Wulfen, but it does help bridge the gap a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind about this unit is that they are not infantry keyworded, they are cavalry keyworded. What that means in particular is that a lot of infantry-specific things won't affect them. For example, they can't go through breachable terrain, they can't move up scalable terrain, and as a result, while they do feel much more maneuverable than Wulfen, there's going to be a lot of situations where they actually, in fact, are not, because you're going to have to deploy them potentially behind line-of-sight blockers or out of line of sight, and a lot of those tend to be ruins and things like that they are then going to have to move around rather than over or through. Additionally, they can't perform a lot of actions. Most actions require infantry keyword, and they don't have that. However, like we mentioned before, they are core, and that is a big deal. So now moving off the raw stats of these units, let's move over to how to use them on the table and their particular profile attributes. Obviously, I think the picture is clear here. While Wulfen are more efficient at dealing damage, being less expensive, but making more high-value attacks, Thunderwolf Cavalry are much better at actually delivering themselves. So while they have a significantly less impressive attack volume than Wulfen, they are significantly faster and slightly more difficult to actually take out. Wulfen, on the other hand, while they can put out attacks relatively efficiently, don't really have a way to deliver themselves and need a little bit of help doing that. Whether that's putting them on an outflank with Cunning of the Wolf or just like putting them in a Land Raider. I mean, I guess you can throw some raw stakes in that Land Raider and coax those guys to go in. They probably have to duck to get in the assault ramp, but I'm sure they're okay with that. They're used to it. That's probably your best bet to actually deliver Wulfen without them immediately getting shot to death in the first turn of the game. However, the downside is that sort of offsets their efficiency by, having to stick them in this 250-point transport to actually deliver those guys. So while we're at it, let's talk about some of the synergies that we can use to deliver these units. First off, the Space Marine Codex, there's not a lot for them, but there's a couple things we can do. Obviously, Thunderwolf Cavalry being core opens up immense options for them. They're going to benefit from all of your tactical precision auras, your rites of battle auras, all of your litanies, and that's all going to be very important. In addition, you can affect both these units with Psychic Fortress, assuming you're not bringing Storm Shields, which you probably are, so I don't think that's going to matter too much. Moving over to the Space Wolf Codex specifically, there's a couple things that affect both of the units. The Morkai's Teeth Bolt can give you reroll 1s to wound, even if you're not a core unit, so you can still give. The Wulfen Stone can give reroll charges to the Thunderwolf Cavalry, and additional explosions for the Super Doctrine, which is pretty good, especially for the Wulfen, who always count as benefiting from that Super Doctrine. Instincts Awoken basically does the same thing. It can switch you into the Assault Doctrine, or give you extra AP if you're already in it, which the Wulfen already are. So if you're bringing like those Frost Claws, for example, they're coming in at AP 4 at that point, which is kind of cool. Keen Senses allow you to ignore hit roll modifiers, which is like meh, but more importantly, also charge roll modifiers. Runic Wards allow these units to act as psychers for the purposes of denying, which is pretty good given that they are going to be relatively aggressive, so they're going to be able to project that deny bubble right deep into your opponent's lines. Countercharge is awesome for any of these heavy melee units, and these units are no exception. Cloaked by the Storm can help to protect them up the table with -1 to be hit. Relentless Assault can help them once they're there with extra consolidation. Once they make contact, Savage Strike is awesome for +1 to wound, especially good in the Thunderwolf Cavalry since it only costs 1 CP if you are bringing only a unit of 5 models, which I think you'll normally be doing since the Thunderwolf Cavalry only cap at 6, and you'll probably want to bring 5 to take advantage of the easier coherency rules. That stratagem seems amazing. It's just +1 to wound in melee, which is cool as long as you made a charge roll. Real good strat. That's a real good one. A couple things affect these units specifically. I mentioned it a little bit before, but Wulfen are infantry, so they can be targeted by Cunning of the Wolf to give them an outflank that is strictly superior to the normal strategic reserve rules. And I think you'll want to be doing this a lot of times if you are not putting them in a transport, since they don't really have any way to deliver themselves all on their lonesome. Thunderwolf Cavalry, on the other hand, get a couple interesting buffs. They have the Pack Hunter stratagem to get reroll wounds on their mount attacks, and 3d6 and drop the lowest on your charge if you charge something or if you target something that is already in melee with a Space Wolves unit to get those puppies real excited. Thunderwolf Cavalry being core also benefit from all of the sagas. So any of your triggered sagas, that's great. You can get those. I think Saga of the Bear is good, especially since Space Wolves no longer have access to any apothecary units, so you can't rely on those guys to give you your 6+ damage ignore. You also can't revive them with apothecaries, which is very sad, although you do have healing bombs to heal them, which you probably won't use, but it's still there if you really want it. Beast Slayer, also good to buff their damage output, and Saga of the Hunter is okay for the buff to charge. You also have access to Bestial Nature to set them into the Assault Doctrine if you need them to be. And there are a couple Thunderwolf Cavalry specific characters, in particular Herald Deathwolf, which can give them a buff to their leadership, which probably doesn't matter, but it's worth talking about. And Canis Wolfborn, who is supposed to buff their mount attacks, but doesn't. Oh, hey, everybody, it's Editing Trevi here to say that that's not right anymore. As of literally a couple hours after I recorded this video, Games Workshop has released the new Space Wolves FAQ, and Canis Wolfborn's ability has been not fixed, but clarified, I guess. They just said it buffs your Thunderwolf Cavalry attacks. Frickin' deal with it. Anyway, Canis Wolfborn works just fine. Pay no attention to me! So, a lot of stuff going on for Thunderwolf Cavalry, less so for Wulfen, but that is what that core keyword will get you. But Thunderwolf Cavalry, I think in this version of the supplement, are trying to get really pushed. I mean, they have a lot of characters and synergies that affect them. But for both these units, I think it's interesting that a lot of these stratagems can target specifically Space Wolf Cavalry or Infantry, for example, so that while they don't pick out the core keyword specifically, they can affect Wulfen if you need them to. I don't know why you don't just give Wulfen core, but I guess that's how the designers decided to do it. But now that we've covered synergies, let's move on to an analysis of these two units together. Now, as I do in all of my datasheet comparisons, I have taken these units and I have mathed them out against some particular enemies. Some defensive profiles that we see very commonly in the game. Those are Guardsman equivalents, which are toughness 3 with 5+ save, Marine equivalents, which are toughness 4 with a 3+ save and 2 wounds, Vehicle equivalents, which are toughness 7 with a 3+ save, and Knight equivalents, which are toughness 8 with a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable save on top of that. In the cases of the infantry, I've calculated how many kills one of these guys will get on average, and in the cases of the big vehicles, how much damage they do on average, and then the points per kill and the points per wound that you can expect. Now, I picked two very similar weapon loadouts for the two just so I had a common ground that I could compare between the two. These aren't always going to be how they're loaded out, and I'm not even 100% sure that they're the most optimized loadout for both of them, but I think it gives us a pretty good idea of the damage output of these two units. The weapon loadouts I selected for this one in particular are the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield, or the Frost Claws in the case of the Wulfen versus Lightning Claws in the case of the Thunderwolf Cavalry. Now, in all these cases, we should keep in mind that the Thunderwolf Cavalry are benefiting from their Crushing Teeth and Claw attacks, so they're making an additional 3 attacks at Strength 5 AP 2 for 1 flat damage. One thing that I did not take into account is the fact that the Wulfen are always exploding. The Wulfen do get the benefit of their Combat Doctrine, so just keep in mind that the Wulfen will be actually doing a little bit more. Whereas the Thunderwolf Cavalry, while they can be benefiting from the Super Doctrine, it does cost you additional CP, or it's just round 3 and they're already doing it. But generally, a lot of fighting goes on in round 2 in Warhammer 40k, and so a lot of times you are not in Assault Doctrine by the time the battle is actually joined. Looking at the results here, with the Thunderhammer, obviously the Wulfen does significantly better against the larger targets and comes out much more efficiently than the Thunderwolf Cavalry Rider. However, the Thunderwolf Cavalry gets a little bit of a bump against infantry because of those Crushing Teeth and Claw attacks. Looking at the Frost Claws versus the Lightning Claws, the Wulfen again will outperform the Thunderwolf Cavalry pretty significantly, especially against low toughness models. Given that the Wulfen's extra strength makes it a little bit better, especially against toughness 3 stuff, and the fact that they're almost half as expensive means that their points per kill or points per wound are going to be much more efficient across the board. Now, I don't think that any of this is really shocking to us. Obviously, the Wulfen with additional attacks and a higher strength and a lower points cost is going to be significantly more efficient than the Thunderwolf all the time. And that's what the math shows. The real question of the day is whether the Wulfen is actually going to make it into combat. And honestly, probably not. They're probably just going to die. Somebody's going to shoot them, or you're going to take a Land Raider and it's going to get blowed up, or they're going to come out of reserve, not have any buffs to their charge, and, you know, fail a 9-inch with a reroll, which is like a 45er. And while you really want to be getting those pretty efficient attacks on your opponent, it's just not that feasible. The Thunderwolf Cavalry, on the other hand, are way less efficient than the Wulfen. However, they're significantly more resilient. Obviously, each one is about twice as hard to kill as one of those Wulfen. Their save is better. They're much faster with a base 10-inch movement plus an extra d6 for the advance. They can also benefit from Canticle. They can also benefit from litanies like Canticle of Hate, a bunch of other stuff to buff their threat range and or survivability. They're just going to have a better chance of getting to combat. So, while the Wulfen will outperform the Thunderwolf Cavalry in raw damage, the Thunderwolf Cavalry probably pull ahead in the comparison between the two just based on intangibles, things that we can't really define mathematically, but that will make them a little bit more successful on the table. Now, moving over to our final verdict. In the competition between the two, I do think Thunderwolf Cavalry win out, but I don't think it is as close as a lot of people expect it to be. Thunderwolf Cavalry are much better at making combat. However, it's a lot. There are a lot of points, man. They're so expensive, and they don't do that much damage. A lot of the damage values that we calculated here are coming out at 20 to 30 points per expected wound, which is abysmal. That's terrible. That's not that good. Obviously, this can be buffed, and the fact that they can get there relatively reliably means that you get more opportunities, you know, to make attacks with them. They can stick into combat probably a little bit longer than Wulfen can, so you're probably making a couple of additional attacks with them, but it's not an amount of damage that particularly excites me. So, moving on to the final verdict, would I put these units in my list? I mean, I'm going to catch a bunch of flack for this. All the Space Wolf players in the combat section are going to go home and get their axes and come for my head. I don't think you should. I don't think you should play either of these units. Wulfen are not very good. They can do a lot of damage, but they'll never make combat, and not having the core keyword is sort of a death sentence in the current Space Marine environment. And Thunderwolf Cavalry, they're so expensive for an eggs-in-the-basket unit that's going to be very aggressive, and sometimes your opponent's not going to be able to deal with it. You win the roll to go first, and they bullet up the table, and you feel really good about yourself. But they're very much like that 40%er unit, where in the games where everything goes right, they're going to crush your opponent's army, but if your opponent is able to take care of them, or if you just lose the roll to go first and don't have a good defensive deployment, they just get killed. Their defensive profile is not that phenomenal that you won't be losing a Thunderwolf Cavalry squad to your opponent's shooting every turn. And if things don't go well for you, they're just all going to die, and you're going to be out like 500 or 600 points, which sucks. Right now, in the competitive game, Space Wolves are not doing as well as they could be, despite the fact that their supplement is actually relatively powerful. They have a good set of secondary objectives, they have a good set of abilities, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that many Space Wolf players are relying on a very aggressive one-dimensional list to win, whereas I think the real power of Space Wolves is that they can bring a much more well-rounded list. A Space Wolf army is already going to be competent in close combat just on the virtue of the fact that it's a Space Wolf army. It doesn't need to bring these hyper-dedicated close combat troops in order to do that, and they have a ton of abilities that can punish you for closing with them. So if they bring a more well-rounded list that backs up a big gun line and forces your opponent into you, but then punishes you with close combat elements like powerful characters or Wulfen dreadnoughts or things like that, I think that list is going to be much more consistent and much more effective than the lists that are focusing on these big flashy melee units that are really, you know, only going to get it done like 1 out of every 2 or 3 games. So I know that's kind of a hot take. I think the Space Wolf community is very high on Thunderwolf Cavalry right now. I don't really rate them as much as a lot of people do, and in a lot of games I see them immediately get blasted off the table, and there's not really much they can do about it. They don't have any counterplay to somebody shooting at them. They just hope to make all their invulnerable saves and keep rolling, and that just is not a great place to be. You need to sort of have a flexible game plan if you want to win games of Warhammer 40k. So yeah, it's a big thumbs down for me for these units. I don't think I would take either of them. If I was going to bring them, I think I would bring Thunderwolf Cavalry over Wulfen, but that's not to say that there's no way you can play Wulfen. You can put them in a transport, you can outflank them, you can do all that stuff with them, and, you know, go hit people with your Wolfie boys. So anyway, that's going to be the Datasheet Deep Dive for me today. Thanks everybody for watching. all the way to the end. And a big thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise for supporting the series and the channel. If you want to vote for future Datasheet Deep Dive topics, you can join them over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. All right, so that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching, everybody. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.